Hi everyone, my name is Mari Bræin and I'm a clinical psychologist working in Norway. I have many years of clinical experience working with children exposed to different kinds of trauma, war, abuse and neglect, and I also do a lot of training for professionals. We all know that children need peace and security. But how can we best take care of children during insecure times, during war and terror? How can we understand the way children experience fear? And how can we help children to process trauma and to calm down, to find back to security? That's today's theme. And I'm gonna be with you through 1 hour of presentation. Children are really wise when it comes to finding meaning in situations that can be really hard to understand. I would like to share with you this poem written by Braden 4 years. It's an animation movie also that you actually could see, but I'm going to read to you this poem that you can see here. So Braden, he tells us, sit down, world, and relax. So we don't have tornadoes. Trees color your leaves. Relax, people. Go to sleep. Relax, wolves. Lay down by the trees. Relax, bullets from guns. Stop shooting people. Fire, eat wood. This beautiful poem shows how children is searching for solutions, meanings, and wanting things to be fixed. The bad things to stop, and the world to relax and find peace. It tells us about how young children find meaning. They put together pieces and try to find solutions. It also shows us a little bit about magic thinking, that you can think, if you just think hard enough, you can make things happen. And especially when things are hard to understand, children and even us adults will try to use the magic thinking to get things to be better. So like Braden is telling us here, relax, people, relax, bullets from guns, stop shooting people. It's really a strong message here, and I think it tells us a lot also about the wise, that children can be really wise, telling us grown-ups to take care. Being in Norway, it's really difficult to understand and to imagine how it is for you these days and what children can be exposed to. It can be really a lot of things during war, and this is just some things that I have been thinking about from Norway, reading the news, following and being in contact with colleagues abroad in Ukraine. So many children can be exposed to loss, separation from their parents, from the father who has to be in the war fighting. It can be children seeing their caregivers in distress, in pain. It can be that the caregivers become less sensitive because of the stress they're in, the daily stress that can be so tough. The children can hear loud and scary noises. Some can be forced to leave their home, to flee. It can be disrupted sleep, either because they have to wake up during the night, or it can be the stress that makes it difficult to sleep. It can be children seeing soldiers assaulting or threatening. It can be children seeing people injured or even dead. It can be seeing the cities or the environment that they feel are the safety in their daily life can be suddenly destroyed. It can be really, really scary for children, of course. And sudden escape, traveling, waiting for hours, being cold during this winter, that we saw horror scenes from children at the borders. It can be loss of routines in the daily life, routines that change suddenly. It can be loss of activities, of nice activities, after school activities. It can be changes in school, even not possible to go to the school. Loss of friends that had to move, or that you can't play together the same way you did before. It can be the unpredictability in the daily life, not knowing what will happen, not knowing when you meet your father again, or how your father is doing, or your grandfather, your uncle. It's lack of necessary supply like food, water, being cold and uncomfortable in the bomb shelves. It can be sexual and physical abuse, and many, many things, many, many more situations. It can be a variety of stressors that we know will affect the children and put on the stress response. Just a few words about trauma. Usually we try to talk about trauma in different ways, and it's typically a little bit confusing. When we speak about trauma, it's the event, the experience that I just talked about, but it's also how it is to be in fear, the experience of fear, the experience of being in a situation where you feel no control, where you feel helpless, where you don't know what will happen next. And it's the effect, the wound we talk about, the effect after the event is over. That's what we talk about as psychological trauma. And it's important to know that children are more vulnerable to trauma for several reasons. One reason is that for children, it's more difficult to understand, to get meaning, to put the experiences into a context. And also, children are more vulnerable when it comes to tolerating strong feelings, strong affect. They really need help from grown-ups, both to find meaning and also to tolerate the emotions and to find ways to calm down. So that's why it's so important to understand that children can be vulnerable and that they're really dependent on their caregivers in many ways, how to come over a trauma without being wounded for life. When it comes to fear responses, we're quite similar across culture. Actually, we have a set of fear responses, stress responses that are similar. And the first thing we will all do facing fear is to stop up, to freeze, and to scan for danger. We will focus on the danger, and we will not be able to reflect and be very creative. We will be really focused, concrete on the threat. Children will immediately seek their attachment figure for security and also for understanding the situation. Is this a threat that I should take seriously? Most of us will react with flight response. We want to get out of the situation. We want to get into security. And if the flight response are stopped, if you're not able to get away, we can also use fight as a response. But many times it's not possible to fight. Children are too small. So many times we will actually see that they will use more of a submit or a shutdown response, where you can see that the child will be more like moving away or just be more passive in their response. But these are the typical responses that we see both in children and in grown-ups. It's important, though, to understand stress response related to the specific developmental task that the children are working on at this time of the development. And today we're going to talk about preschool children and school children. And stress reactions will very much show up in what they're working on developmentally. So preschool children, we can see a lot of clinging, we can see separation anxiety, we see a lot of food and sleeping problems, and we can see that they might have problems in regulating their behavior, and some children might even stop playing the things that they have been experiencing. Sometimes we can also see passivity and helplessness, and that's really something that is not so common. Development, of course, school demand learning capacity, and we see that children exposed to a lot of stress, they have less capacity to learn how to read, to learn math, you know, and they get memory problems. And very, very common is somatic complaints. These children might not tell you that I'm really afraid, but they might have headache, they might feel stomach pain. So that's really a way that children both experience stress and communicate that I'm not doing well. I need you to help me to calm down, or to if you're not able to help the children to calm down, these stress reactions actually can affect the brain, the three good helpers. And we made some movies and actually also small figures representing important parts of the brain. Of course, it's a very simplified model. It's not really how the brain is working, but it can be helpful to understand what happens during stress. I will now show you this movie.
Marius 13 år. Han liker å spille fotball og sjakk. Marius elsker når ting klaffer, men hater å tape. Inne i Marius det noen hjelpere. La oss kalle dem Anton Alarm, Sara Søke og Tore Tenke. Anton Alarm reagerer lynraskt mot fare. For eksempel hvis Marius går ut i veien og det kommer en bil. Da gir Anton Alarm lynrask beskjed om at han må flytte seg. Tar vare på minner. Hun god til å kjenne igjen følelser. For eksempel kan Sara minne Marius om følelsen av å være forelsket. Eller lukten av pepperkaker som minner om jul. Men for de som har dårlige minner om jul, kan lukten av pepperkaker få fram vonde følelser. Når Marius spiller sjakk, trenger han hjelp fra Tore Tenke. Han er god til å vurdere ulike måter å gjøre ting på. Tore Tenke vet hva som er lurt å gjøre i vanskelige situasjoner.
Sjakk. Sjakkmatt.
Når Marius taper, tar Anton alarm over styrene. Marius syns ikke det er noe særlig når han klikker. Han har gjort det ganske ofte i det siste. Nå er det viktig at Anton, Sara og Tore kan finne en løsning og samarbeide. Det er ikke alltid like enkelt.
So finding a way to cooperate, these three helpers when in stress can be really hard. And in this film, we saw a boy that had experienced trauma before. He was now in foster care, but he was still struggling with this Anton alarm taking over and taking control, actually, because he was still in a state of fear or easily was triggered by something he experienced, like small things, like losing in a chess match. So the stress response system, a normal or a typical way to explain the stress response system is a little bit like I did in this movie. And we know that the stress comes from the surrounding, from the outer world or the inner world. And the senses are really good in picking up threats. And then the information is transformed up to the feeling and memory system in the brain, which match a little bit with how I experienced before, and how does this experience make sense depending on my history. What does it mean for me, what I'm experiencing now? And then the information is processed further up to the frontal lobe, the thinking and control center in the brain, which makes a more conscious decision of what should I do now? How can I react in this situation? And if it's nothing scary, really, if it's just like a false alarm, then the thinking and control center will send back information that you're okay now, you can relax. So you will just take a little breathe, maybe regulate your body. You might check, is everyone okay here? Who shall I relate with today? And you will also think about what happened. How is this experiencing? How does it make sense? And what can I do further today? So we need this alarm response. We need it to wake up, and we also need to calm down. And what can be really harmful for our stress response system is when we only regulate up all the time. We regulate up and we don't have capacity or time to calm down. That can be really hard for our stress response system. And if children goes around like this, with him always being the boss in the brain, it can also affect the development. So what's really the best way to help children? I'm sure that you also have the answer here, and it's all about co-regulation. It's how we as caregivers are able to help children to find peace, and we need to use our own internal helpers in order to make it as secure as possible and predictable as possible, and to support the children and also be there with them when they're afraid, so that they're not alone with the fear. And we need to, with Tore, think we need to try to make explanations for the children so that they're not sitting there confused all the time. So using our own internal helpers, we will transmit our calmness over to the child, and the child will, together with you or the grown-up being there, find more peace. So we can see it here, just a quick example. We see a child that can be in terror for some kind of reason. Could be that they're cold or not, or afraid of something. And we see here in this figure how the parent wake up and see, hear, touch, hold, rock, and do all what is natural for us human beings, trying to support the child when in terror. And we see also in this figure that children being met in this way will not be in terror for a long time. They will find peace, and they will, after a while, learn how to regulate themselves more and more. And they will also expect others to be kind, to be nice, to be together when something is difficult in life. So a child that has been met like this, being stressed in school, for example, will have good memories of getting support from other human beings. So they might walk up to the teacher and tell the teacher, I'm being bullied today, for example. But children who have this kind of experience, co-dysregulation, it's the same kind of fear or terror that the child is experiencing, but the parent are not only alert, but get up in alarm. They might jiggle, shake, yell, disengage. And after a while, the child might have to find his or her own way to calm down, to self-soothe. Some children might start to eat a lot, they might start to self-harm, or to find some way to calm down the stress response alone without this co-regulation experience. So these children, they get less support, and they also get less trust in other people when it comes to get help with big emotions, or when they have a difficult time, for example, at school. A child having this experience might have problems asking the teacher for help. So what do we see during war? Well, we can see actually that this co-regulation might be a little bit disturbed, actually, because of the stress that the caregivers are dealing with. So it might be more co-dysregulation. And I really mean that the best way to help the children is really to help the grown-ups. How can I find peace a little bit so that I can be present with my child in the apartment, or during nighttime? How can we find a little bit of kind of peacefulness in our own home so that I can be with my child, and to prevent this as much as possible, even though it's not possible to always be like this. No one will be like this all the time, but as much as possible, it's important to be there with the children. And we also sometimes see that being absent, being not there, being depressed, being very very far away from the child mentally, the children will lack important experiences of being mirrored or felt understood. These children, they might feel very alone, and they also get less opportunity to learn about how to self-regulate and what their inner states mean. And also they have less capacity to understand what other people feel and need, actually. They get less contact with their own emotions and others' emotions. So helping a child, actually the first thing we do is to try to calm down Anton Alarm. Actually, we try to do something that is good for him. And it could be, like I talked about now, co-regulation, be there together with the child. It's about being empathic to the child. It can be a lot of physical activity, using rhythm, dance, grounding, here and now focus. And when Anton Alarm is a little bit less in a state of fear, we use Sara Seek, share feelings. We do a lot of activities together, and the children will get the sense of being with others, as it can be joyful, and they will learn a lot about themselves in these relationships. And then we can talk. When we get contact, then we can start to find a way to understand what's happening, and we will talk about what's the situation here. We will find solutions, maybe in difficult situations in the home. So when I speak about what children in stress need, I usually say that we need to calm down Anton Alarm so that we can get in contact with Sara Seek, and then it's easier to use Tore Think and find ways to solve difficult situations. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about these three helpers. But first, I want to also express very deeply that it's really not possible to be present all the time. It's as for caregivers, it's really in situation that we find back to each other, that we repair the relationship. That's opportunities for learning, actually. So look for ways to re-engage and reconnect at the child's and your pace. We learn so much about that it's possible to get back to each other, even though it can be difficult times. So how can the three good helpers get help? I will now quite quickly actually go through what can be good help for Anton. Then I will talk about Sara, and then I will talk about Tore. Anton Alarm, what does he need? Well, he needs safety and protection. He needs co-regulation, and he needs help to be here and now. He loves physical and sensory stimulation and routines and rhythm. We know that children in survival mode, when Anton Alarm is really strong, the child is dysregulated, not focused, impulsive, out of contact. So the primary goal then is to support regulation into a more regulated state. And then when the need is met, we will see that the child will be more regulated. So it's important to be curious about what's the need behind the behavior that the child is showing. What's the need and how can we meet this need? Being curious. And then you start with yourself as a caregiver. And many of you listening to me today, you might be in a position that you are doing supervision, for example, or you work with parents in different way. How can you regulate yourself first? You might take a break, you might drink water, slowly breathing, you might just look a little bit around. So maybe what's the need of the child then? A hug? Maybe the child needs to move, to get attention, to be stimulated in different ways. So what is the child really seeking? What kind of activities can be good for the child? Can regulate the child into a more into a state where it's better to get contact with the child. Using routine and rhythm is so important under chaos and stress, because also trauma and terror, war is associated with chaos and loss of control. And we know that routines in our daily life really support the felt sense of safety. It also gives us predictability. We know what will happen. We know when to eat. We know when to sleep. And we know that the routines will naturally shift. That's just normal changes in our daily life. But I think that during times like you're experiencing now, finding some kind of routines and supporting those routines are so important. And it's also necessary for children to gain new skills, because we need repetition. And this outer structure, the structure in the daily life will after a while become like a more internal structure. So how can you re-establish a sense of predictability for the children and try to keep the natural rhythm in the family as much as you can? It's about meal times, transitions from home to school, when go to sleep. And it's so important to use the rituals that you know in your culture, like using the songs, maybe pick up songs you had from your own childhood if you're a parent. You can use poems, you can use pray. I mean, it's so important to hang on to those rituals. It brings in security and something that everyone knows. And it can also be, you can also experience pleasant feelings, of course, eating the food or doing these cultural rituals together. We know that Anton Alarm, he really likes to be physical. So all kinds of sensory strategies can be very helpful during stress. It's about listening to music. Maybe if children are distressed by hearing a lot of noises, sometimes it can be good actually to have like a sound counselor, sound machines. But it can also be important to give them like music to listen to, or storytelling. So sound is one important sense. Touch. I've heard actually that you're from Ukraine, you're really like physical people. You like to hug your children, so use physical contact, hugs, but it can also be weighted blankets and soft pillows, stuffed animals, touch stones or things to fiddle with. Stressed children, they can if you give them something like strong pastilles or even chewing gums, it can be good for stimulating the jaws. We have a lot of muscles here. It's not random that all the football trainers, they use a lot of chewing gum when they're supporting their teams. It's probably because it's good for stress regulation. Smell, use good smells. It's a very strong sense that orient us to here and now. So using air fresheners or flowers or whatever you have to smell, that can be a good way to get the stress response system to relax a little bit. And taste, gum, hard candy to suck on. It can also be sight, picture of safe people, someone you love that's not here by the moment. Talk about favorite places you've been, favorite places you want to go. I saw this movie here of this Ukrainian girl singing to the crowded bomb shelter. I don't know if you've seen this, but it was really touching to see her with this soft voice. And I can imagine that this activity for her, but also for the other people in that room, must have been very, very, it makes us closer, and it does something with our nervous system, actually. Music, we always use music in all kind of cultures. Music has been so important to go through difficult times and scary times. Children are naturally regulating themselves through gross motor activities. They like to jump up and down. So give them activities and stimulation, even though if they're inside apartments, try to be creative and find ways to move, stand on the head, run around, dance parties. It's so important for regulation. And I can only imagine sitting still too much in small apartment. It can be challenging for the children and the family. So it's important to see what kind of opportunities they have to move, so that they get the needs met when it comes to gross motoric activities. Of course, we have a lot of different breathing techniques that can be very good, like, for example, having children to raise their arms up and down. So breathing out, down regulates. And if we're able to breathe a little bit longer out than in, we know that this parasympathetic nervous system becomes activated. We can use lots of imaginary techniques, like imagine that you have a breath and you try to blow out birthday candles or dandelion, like you see here. So when we teach regulating activities to children, it's also good for us as grown-ups when we do it together with the children. Here are some activities. We can just look at it a little bit. You have different kind of muscle relaxations activities and imaginary that can help the child to come into a different state. You will have all these slides, so I will not take time to read through everything, but just read it. And it's a lot of different activities that you can do with children to help them to get into a more safe state. It can also be a good idea, for example, at school, if you have children that are really dysregulated, so that they're not able to be in learning mode all the time, it can be good to make like the safe corners where you put different comforting materials, maybe some music, maybe some books, and you can tell the children that when you feel uncomfortable, you can go in here and you can sit here and you can try to find a little bit of peace. It's not like a timeout place, like a punishment. It's just a place to relax a little bit, so that you can get back to a state where it's more easy to sit in a classroom. You can even have these small spaces in the classroom, so that some of the children might need to sit here and rest a little bit, and even though they can hear what's happening in a different part of the classroom. So it's really a way to help children to relax and help them back to a learning mode. I know that you learned about the window of tolerance, and that this window of tolerance for children this age are smaller than the window of tolerance in adults. And we know that several different activities can be upregulating and downregulating. And many of the same activities actually can be both upregulating and downregulating. And here are some examples that can be typically downregulating, like having stress balls, having kind of glitter creams, have stuffed animals, look at something pleasured and smell something pleasuring. It can be magic rocks or grounding stones. And typical upregulating, if the child is really tired and just one little bit too passive, it can be awaking the nervous system, like playing I Spy, like zooming into different things. What can you see in the room? Count things you see that are blue, for example, in the room, and describe what they see. They can rub hands with glitter cream or have butterfly hugs, like you see here. It can be both upregulating and downregulating. And to squeeze a stress ball, something to squeeze. So it's important from my perspective that children, they do a lot of things just spontaneously. And we grown-ups, we need to be curious about what is the child doing when they're kind of running around. Maybe they're doing something to regulate themselves. And we have to find ways that are not disturbing for other people, but to use the activity that the child is searching. It's so important, rather than saying, just stop it. Sit still. We need to find an activity so that the child can get what they need actually to be more regulated. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sarah now. What does she need? She needs love and protection. She needs help to tolerate and regulate her feelings. She needs friendship. She needs empathy, that someone understand or want to understand how she's doing. And it's so important for me to express to you that the very best protection that children can have during war and terror is safe attachment. And we know that it's so important to help children to integrate and tolerate trauma, to have someone they trust to help them regulate the feelings and to help them understand. So this special bond, that attachment that really activates under threat and stress, and not being close to the person you love, it really makes you feel so much discomfort. So that when it's for us human beings, facing threat means attachment system being awaked. So when we want to understand attachment, actually we need to see a little bit of threat in the situation. Then we can see how the child, or here Harlow's monkeys, clinging actually to a wire mother in this study. We saw from the 1955 study, how the small monkeys were clinging to the wire mother when a scary object came into this laboratory. We know now that from these early attachment experiences, children develop internal working models that gives them expectation about how will I be met, how are human beings, can I trust someone, or am I totally alone? So when we see in Norway or in the rest of the world these terrible scenes with separations in Ukraine, it's really so touching to see these strong emotions and the attachment systems that are awaked, but it's disturbed because of the separation. So how to work with this strong attachment reactions and the strong loss and grief many times during separation. So we know that this optimal care here, to be present, to be attentive, to be attuned to the state of the child, to be responding to the child, and to repair when the contact is lost. This is important for optimal care. And also we know that war, stress, and immigration can reduce this sensitivity of care. So be particularly focused on how to use touch, tactile stimulation, how to work on activating this attachment system and meeting the needs of the child again. Like touch gives a feeling of safety, deep pressure on the skin is calming, and you can use different kind of activities like wrapping in or massage or just being aware about the importance of physical contact during difficult times. So if possible, avoid separation. And when the child is feeling sorrow, grief, protest, and anger, it's important to support the feelings and to meet the feelings of the children. It's important to help children to share and express their feelings through play, words, drawing, but also storytelling. It's important to know and to be a little bit aware that children might find different explanations about why dad had to leave. Was it something wrong with me? Was I very bad? Was it a day that I was really bad? Is it my fault? So this kind of misunderstanding, it's important to clear up and help the child to find meaning in a more correct way. During separation, of course, contact with the caregiver and information about what's happening and when will that come back, and this kind of sense of predictability is really important. During transition time, it can be good for children to have these puppies or toys or clothes or something that remind about dad, or in this transition situation, moving from one place to another, to have objects that children can kind of carry with them. That's important for dealing with the attachment stress when they feel this loss. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Tore, I think. What does he need? He needs help to find meaning. He needs help to understand what is happening. He needs to work on problem solving, finding out difficult problems and how to solve them. That's really important capacity for us, for children when they grow up. It's also about processing trauma and tolerate and integrate the trauma. But it's also finding hope for the future, that things can be better and we can get through this together. So how can we help children to gain meaning? As I already said in this presentation, it's important to give explanations for what's happening as good as you can. And they need explanations many times. When in a stressed state of mind, it's really difficult to get all the information and to integrate it and to use it. So repetition is important. It can be important to help the child to understand reactions that they see in themselves, in others. So psychoeducation about stress response and about how we all are in a state of fear at this moment. It's important that the grown-ups find words and help them to understand. It's important to give them as much predictability as possible, to tell the child what is happened now, what will happen tomorrow, and give them as much predictability as possible. And you can use concrete, you can use play, you can use symbols when you explain. So that, like I'm doing here, you know, we have these symbols for the 3 helpers that can be affected by stress. But it's also good just to give the children the possibility to play and to draw and to talk. And get the sense of the way the child is understanding the situation, and to answer question the child might have. So be aware of this misunderstanding and the magic thinking, as I was talking about. It's also important to remember that children are really good going in and out of the theme. They need break. They need time to just play and have fun. And for children, it is possible to be in grief and sorrow, and then after just a few minutes, they can be in a playful state. And that's really a capacity that it's important to know, and give the children the space and the possibility to play, even though it's difficult times. It's really important for healing and getting through trauma and terror. So just letting children opportunity to play naturally is a way of processing trauma. Make sure that they have safe space to play naturally. It's very good to use stories and read books to children. Use stories, use literature from your culture or abroad. It can be about whatever, actually. It can be about difficult times, but it can also just be like fantasy or some kind of fairy tales that you know about. Pick it up again. It's time now to read books. You can use art and drama. You can also talk about the history of your family, the story about me, you know, like making this narrative. The whole point is here to make a kind of meaning and a coherence, that something started. I was a little baby, and then I moved here and there, and now I'm here, and I have my siblings, and they are here and there, and I will have a future. So you kind of make this kind of coherence, and this can be done in different ways. Here we see stones for good memories and flowers. Now, stones for bad memories and flowers for good memory. It's a narrative therapy that can be used. It's important to know that it's not dangerous or bad to talk about difficult experience that child might have seen, for example. We all have a tendency to move away from difficult feelings, and that can make children feel very lonely. So it's actually good to be present and show that you want to hear, the worst thing that the children saw. You want to hear, and you can help them through. It's very good when you talk about bad things, about really dramatic things that children can have seen or heard about. You can listen and be there, and wait until the worst part of the story is told. Try to get through the worst part. It's a little bit like watching a terror movie, that it's important to watch through the worst and most scary part of the movie. Naturally, all kind of narratives have this kind of wave, you know. So it's really, really scary, and then it calms down. So try to get through the worst part of the experience, and you can always take breaks when you talk about stories. You can have children play, and they can go back to the story, and you can continue. Show that you tolerate the pain, and that children can share their experience with someone. It's really important not to be all alone with it. And then you can help the children also out of this kind of story or this trauma that are not integrated yet. So you can talk a little bit about what shall we do further. You know, do you want to play something? Should we go and make some food together? You know, try to help the child back to something else, to the normal day. So we can look at trauma processing, like spontaneously processing. That's really what happens naturally in play, conversation, through behavior. But it can also be more structured processing, and that is more processing that is done or with a trained therapist. So in the spontaneous processing, it's just, you know, gradually integration and acceptance of what's happening. When the caregivers support and accept and help the child to heal, most children will naturally process what happened. We are actually built to process bad experiences. When it comes to structured processing, it's more planned, and we have special methods, narrative exposure therapy, EMDR. We have different methods dealing with and planning how to work with those bad feelings and memories that seem a little bit stuck inside. And then we many times help to change, like, this negative belief, like it's my fault, maybe misunderstanding, or I feel helpless, out of control. We kind of work more specific with those kind of negative beliefs that can be a little bit stuck. But it's planned, and we need specific methods and training to do that kind of structured processing. Most children will do well with spontaneously processing. So support through caregivers are usually the most effective way to help children. And children can express trauma through body, memory, how their posture are, through play action. It can be through interaction with others, how they expect others to be. It can be familiar games like playing peekaboo. It can be dramatic play where you see children play out like a war or the competition between the good and the bad. It can be symbolic play where you see that the teddy bear suddenly gets a role, or the doll gets a role, and you have this interaction between these symbols or these toys. It can be stories, telling stories and making stories about the family. It can be talking about what happened and trying to find a meaning and trying to search for some kind of solutions. I think it's important to focus on hope and working with children and adolescents also. It's so important to talk about dreams, to talk about the future, and talk about what we would like to happen. Hope is so important when dealing with stress and terror and war. And that's actually the next generation that's gonna take responsibility one day. And how we process, how we work with this time is so important for the time that will come. And to dare to hope. Amanda Gorman, she said during the presidential inset a few years ago now, she said, there is always light if we're brave enough to see it. So we need to be brave also to dare to hope for the future. I'm going to end this presentation with sum up a little bit about the 3 good helpers that we need to support working with children. So Anton, he needs protective and attuned caregivers that can help the child to re-establish a sense of safety. Sarah, she needs love and care so that she can express feelings and tolerate what's happening. Tore needs to understand what is happening and why. He needs hope that things can be all right. That will make better cooperation inside and also with the world out there. thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you the very, very best.